Good morning, my name is Russell Horsey and I'm a chartered arboriculturalist based in Wales, and today I'm going to talk to you about understanding engineering and how trees can help get more people onto public transport. And why am I doing that? Because actually our role as a small consultancy is we do a lot of work across the UK, working with community groups, city councils, and also we do a lot of interdisciplinary work with other disciplines, and I think that's really important. And why is that important? It's important because a lot of people don't understand what we are. We're still quite a young profession, and whilst we might understand the picture on the right as an urban tree, actually engineers are starting to think that an urban tree is what you see on the left, and that's a city tree, which is an engineered moss solution with some seating, which in this case died because it wasn't watered. So, it's really understand that we understand how we talk to other professions. Doesn't matter where you work across the world, actually we run into the same challenges. I was lucky enough to work out in Canada, and in Canada they have lovely wide streets, lovely wide verges, yet still you end up with streets going next to lampposts. On the right there you can see a structurally engineered tree pit full of Coke cans, coffee mugs, plastic. So again, it's important with projects that you're on site at the right time. Green infrastructure has is massive. It's the new buzzword. It's what everyone's interested in. And actually, if we look to Europe, they do some really good work. A lot of their green infrastructure goes in early on in the construction phase, where the public infrastructure is put in, the roads are put in, the tram systems are put in, but the trees are also put in, and they go in before you start building. And that's really important because it means the landscape has a chance to basically embed and to grow. And so when people move in, there's already a landscape there. Unfortunately, in the UK, we seem to do it the other way around. We build the roads, we build the infrastructure, we build the houses, and the last thing to go in is the green infrastructure. The builders go off site, and then we end up having to deal with some of the issues. In terms of capital projects, capital projects are run by engineers and they don't necessarily understand what green infrastructure is. Okay, so this is a good example. This is a bus guided tramway in Cambridge. And unfortunately, all the green vegetation has been basically ripped out from within the site boundaries. There's a bit of green infrastructure there, a few trees left on the outside, and maybe that scheme will get some token trees. And it's a real problem actually, and it's why we need to talk to other disciplines. And why do I think we need to talk to other disciplines? Well, it's all about money. Okay, trees sit under Defra in England, and Defra's budget is 2.2 billion, although a lot of that money goes to farming. There was a lot of publicity a few years back where we were given £10 million for an urban tree challenge fund. But if you put that into context and you look at the Department for Transport, their annual budget is 10 times that of Defra. And in the same year that £10 million was announced to plant urban trees, £420 million was announced to fill potholes. Okay, and then actually in the same budget we also saw £28.8 billion put aside for motorway upgrades over 5 years, and a further £3.5 billion spent on improving local bus routes and local routes. So whilst if Defra spent all of its budget on trees, actually, if we don't influence how others work and other departments, there's a massive ability for other departments to undo any good work that's done by sort of departments like Defra and people tree planting. And engineers actually have a bad experience of trees. Engineers are out there looking to manage our roads, looking to manage our infrastructure, and their experience of trees may not always be that good. And some of that's quite right. Engineers have had bad experiences. Trees that were put in the 70s and 80s. This is an example here of a cherry tree. It was put on a vigorous growing rootstock, and so their experiences when you say I'm going to put on cherry potentially is if they've been in this sector a while is trees that were grown on the wrong rootstock that was causing damage to pavements and infrastructure, and so we need to explain our message. We need to explain actually the nursery sector now is not doing that. It's planting cherry trees, it's grafting cherry trees onto a much better rooting stock that's not going to damage infrastructure. People also talk about paving standards. On the left is an example of a garage that was built in Bristol where I worked. Somehow planning didn't really come to us as the tree managers, and they'd agreed that a garage could go right next to the tree. The first we knew of it was when the garage had been built. The homeowner came to us and said, could we take our tree out? And we said, well, no. And they said, well, how are we going to get into the garage? And we said, well, actually, that's not really our problem. Well, we've got planning permission from the council. And it's like, well, you have, but that doesn't mean to say that we as the council landowner are going to take away the tree. So that became a very, very expensive cycle store. On the right is an example from New York, where, again, similar example of damage caused to infrastructure potentially, where, they pave their pavements using concrete rather than tarmac, but, trees will again grow along and around, but there they quite an innovative way of fixing things, where they've put money into going and repairing and moving the sidewalks. So, we need to look at paving standards. Engineers are worried about seeing this kind of thing. This is an example of a bus that came along. A car pulled out in front of it. It moved out of the bus running lane, and when it pulled back into the bus running lane, there was a slight camber in the road. The bus tilted, and you can just see in the back of that picture a plane tree. The front of that bus hit the plane tree on the trunk and slice the top of the roof off, and this is what engineers are worried about. Now, in this instance, we had very good relationships with our engineers, and so when we came to look at this, we started looking along all the bus routes to try and find areas where there were similar issues of the camber, and we did remove a few trees, but actually in many cases we did other things. We put build outs in. We put signs on trees to warn bus drivers that there were low-hanging trees, and there are different ways. So again, if you build up good working relationships with other departments and other professions, then actually when you do, if unfortunately you do have an incident like this, it doesn't mean that the instant reaction is we've got to remove all the trees along bus routes. When I ran the team in Bristol for about 8 years, and one of the issues when I first arrived to Bristol was we weren't actually replacing our trees. We didn't have the money, and so it was a big issue for us. We were losing trees, tree pits were disappearing, tree pits were being tarmacked over because we weren't getting them filled quick enough, and it was costing us a lot of money to replant. So we set up a project called Tree Bristol to try and raise profile of the trees of the city, and to raise money and to bring in business. And this is a good example of where we also need to think about how we talk to the public. It's not just about how we talk to engineers, it's about how we talk to the public. In this instance, we were going to remove a small tree. It was growing outside of next to a building. It was growing out of a wall, and basically we agree with the residents, but this tree has to come out. It's going to cause damage in the future. It's only a tiny tree, but we're going to put 7 or 8 trees back in, and so that's what we agreed to do. So we did a small community planting scheme. We got the local school out, we got the local residents out, they all planted. And this is on the right hand side there, you can see a small picture, I think it was on page 13 or 14 of the local newspaper, saying, isn't it brilliant? The council's working well with residents, they're putting in new trees, and away we went. The following week we took out the small oak tree. We didn't take out the stump at the time, which was probably not the best thing to do actually in hindsight. And then the front page of the same newspaper was anger as beautiful oak tree was felled. And unfortunately for us, which was where we did lots of publicity, but we still couldn't please everybody all the time. Local residents had gone out, they got the press involved. The same school that we'd done the planting with had done a nice art club of a devil with a chainsaw with our city's logo on it. And they got really close to what was actually quite a tiny tree and made it look like it was a massive tree. But that's what happens if you get a wide angled lens really close. So difficult situation. We thought we'd done lots of consultation. We thought we talked to lots of people, but actually there were some not very happy people. And I guess, that's part of the problem with trees. Trees are quite emotive. People always have a story about trees, or their tree or local trees. But it's really important that we engage with the public and we talk in the language they understand. One of the benefits of Tree Bristol, though, was it started to bring additional money into the city, which meant we could start to look to replant areas that we hadn't planted for years. And we talked to our highways colleagues, we explained what we were doing, and they were comfortable with that. So, one of our quick wins was to start putting trees in on verges. So over the years, due to lack of budget, we'd lost trees throughout the suburbs of Bristol. And so we started looking for grass verges where we could put quick wins in. We did a lot of consultation with people to say, we're coming to this street. Would you like to see a tree outside your house? In some cases, people said no. And we didn't plant it. Actually, we just planted where people said yes, because we didn't want there to be conflict straight away. And on the right hand side, you can see some very upright trees that have been chosen. We asked residents what types of trees they wanted to see. We gave them a choice of 3 trees, and there was a public vote. And the winning tree in this case was an upright cherry, and that's what we planted along the street. And actually, for that road, it was quite a long road, and we planted over about 3 years. And by the 3rd year, people that had said no to a tree in year 1 came out and said, yes, please, we'd like to see some trees. Can you come back and plant our tree? So that was a good example of working with the public to to change things, and also working with our engineers to say actually cherries don't cause the problems that you've had and you've seen in the past. We're going to put trees in that aren't going to cause problems. We were having quite a lot of success, and then we came to be asked by local residents to put a tree in the centre of a roundabout, which at the time didn't seem too difficult, although we didn't have any standard drawings for how to do a tree pit within Bristol. So I worked with our engineers. They did a design for a tree pit. It all seemed to be going very smoothly. We put the tree in, and then I got issued with a bill for about £5,000 for design costs. Now, the tree in question went in, was at 2025. I think it was about £400 at the time. It probably cost us another couple of £100 and some traffic management to put the tree in. And then we had to pay a £5,000 bill to do design work. So it started to show me that, when you come to design things with highways engineers, it can get quite expensive. Bristol also won a lot of money back in 2006 to start doing what was called Homezones at the time. And this was to start to look at putting in build outs and to start to try and make areas that didn't have trees and weren't very nice places to live and to work, just to try and soften things and to try and slow vehicles down. But actually, of the £1 million, £600,000 was spent doing design work. So design work is quite an easy way to spend your budget. And only £1 million went in to putting in new trees and new tree pits. And what this taught me was that actually, whilst it can be really effective, it's really expensive to go in and retrofit. So it's always better to try and work as early as you can in the design process with engineers to try and get trees in as early as possible. This is the scheme. 13 years later, trees are doing really well. We've got existing tree pits. I probably would go back and put bigger trees in now, but at least we have those tree pits forever. Bristol was very successful when it came to bidding for money. We won a lot of money from cycling, and we also won a lot of money to improve our networks. Initially, when the bus nets were being improved, we weren't really engaged as a team. So we saw 2 new routes out of 10 going across Bristol, and there were no trees, there was no greenery, and there was a lot of public uproar. Actually, that how was this an improved route? It still looked horrible. There were lost opportunities for build outs to put trees in. And as a result, we were brought into the design team late in the day to run and look at things on the rest of the routes, and we were given £500,000 to basically help get trees and green infrastructure into the rest of the route. And so I employed a dedicated officer, and his job was to basically look for as many spots as he could find to put trees in along bus routes, to procure trees, to ensure they were watered, and to get trees in the ground. We didn't always get it right. Part of the consultation we did initially was to get trees in. We expected to put the trees in sort of late February. Come early April, the tree pits weren't ready. We said, okay, we're not going to plant the trees. These were going to be cherry trees because it's going to be too dry. And when we asked the nursery to hold on to the trees, and we thought we'd plant them this winter. And then in July, I got a phone call from one of the project managers saying, okay, the tree pits are ready. It's July. Can you come and plant the trees next week? And we said, well, no, we're in the middle of a heat wave. And I was told, well, actually, no, we need the trees planted in next week because the secretary for Department for Transport is coming to open the route. So we put the trees in. Department for Transport came. Everyone drove up and down the route. It all looked amazing. And everyone went away happy. But then a week later, we got a phone call to say the trees are drooping. They're not looking very good. And we said, well, we said this would happen. We're watering the trees pretty much every other day at that point. But it was so hot and they were so stressed that they were really struggling. And actually, the businesses came out and said, well, actually, you've really got to make sure these trees don't die. They're really important. You've caused nothing but problems when you've been doing all this road works, but now the trees are here, people are stopping, people are taking notice there are actually shops here, they're stopping and shopping. And so what we did was we started to engage with shops, and we gave them watering cans, and actually the shopkeepers came out and the shopkeepers started to water those trees every morning. And actually that's something we do on a lot of our projects now. The photo on the right is Swansea High Street, and basically there some trees were put in. COVID arrived, the project went bankrupt, in between different engineers coming in and highways contractors coming in to fix it. The trees were really struggling, so we worked with a local group in Swansea, and basically they went out and spoke to all the local shops and gave them watering cans, and the local shops were coming out and watering the trees because they thought the trees were a massive improvement on what was there, and they didn't want to see them die. So again, if we can engage with people, that's really brilliant. One of the other things we did on the bus route scheme was we looked to change our working practice. Historically, we'd worked very much in isolation from the highways guys, in terms of they'd come in, they'd build the tree pits, they'd finish the road, they'd disappear, and then we'd come and put the trees in afterwards. That was quite an expensive way of working. Putting in traffic management is really expensive. And so, you ended up double paying for things. So we looked at the working practice and said, well, is there a better way of doing this? And actually, the better way was to come and plant the trees before the final surface of the road went on. One of the things I hadn't appreciated until we started working in close partnership on this project was that actually by coming in with sandy soil and putting sandy soil on fresh tarmac was that you block all the pores, and a lot of tarmac is made to basically drain water away from the road, and if you fill the pores with soil, it doesn't work. So what we had here was we came in, most of the road was completed, the tree pits were completed, we did the tree planting, and then before the final surface of the road went on, basically we came in, planted the tree, so if there was any soil spill, it didn't really cause any difference. Okay. We also put cages around the trees, and we did that in the parks to stop vandalism, but actually we did it here to stop cars from driving into things, and we found that actually people don't like to scratch their cars, so if there's a big metal cage around a tree on a street, then people aren't going to drive into it because they don't want to scratch their cars. Okay. But we also used it as an early example of suds. So what's happened here is we've used a very sandy soil. We've used a species of tree which is almost New Horizon, which is very salt tolerant. It can cope with a lot of water. It can cope with sandy soils, and it is a great street tree. So and then this is a few years later, the tree's growing, and then the picture on the right is a few years again. All was going well. We moved to the next year of the project. Again, the highways team hadn't quite managed to get the tree pits ready in time. They understood, though, that we shouldn't be planting, so they tarmac capped them. And we said, OK, we'll come and take the tarmac caps off in November, and we'll replant the trees. But we didn't really tell the public what we were doing, and we started getting complaints because they thought that the paving hadn't been finished. They didn't understand why there was a tarmac squares throughout. So the officer that was working for me came up with a tree banksy, and basically it was a stencil saying, Tree Bristol, promoting the Tree Bristol brand and planting here soon. And by having that on top of each of the tarmac caps, people could see that, they could understand what was going on, and we stopped getting complaints. And what happened was the trees became a must-have item, whereas before trees were very peripheral, and it was all about paving, it was all about bus stops, it was all about nice bollards. Trees became a must-have throughout the project, and we ended up in a situation where actually the engineers were finding new tree pits, which weren't even on our plans, and saying, would you like an extra tree pit, as they dug up different parts of the project, and we were saying yes. So we actually got a lot more tree pits out of it than we expected. It also meant it was much easier when we came to the final part of the scheme, which was we also used them to define public safety. So as you came up to trees, there were crossing points, which again meant that drivers knew that as they approached a tree pit, they should slow down because it was associated with a crossing point. So they acted as for public safety. They gave the public somewhere to go to if if you have a small family and you can't quite get across the road straight away. And actually, they work really, really very well. And actually, over the bus routes, we saw massive increases in quality of the bus services, and also the amount of people using the buses massively jumped. So similar projects where they hadn't invested in green infrastructure saw the amount of people using buses going up 2 or 3 or 4%. And what we actually saw was, in some cases, up to 40% more people using bus routes. And actually on the White Ladies Road, where cyclists hadn't really been coming out, cycle counts went up hugely, which was really positive, and it kind of justified the risk that the engineers had taken with us to try this as a new way of doing things. And that's kind of started to change the way I talked. I guess this project changes the way I talk with engineers, and now I try and talk in the kind of terms that engineers understand. I'm not talking about aesthetics. I'm not talking about beautification of a site. I'm actually talking about how trees can encourage more people to use buses, bring cyclists out, how they can slow down traffic, how they can make a place seem softer, how they can make a place seem more safe. And those are the kind of things that as you go through your career, it's sometimes we need to, and you'll be taught about aesthetics and other benefits of trees, but actually sometimes we need to find out what it is that our customer wants. And in this case, my customer is an engineer, and they're not interested in the aesthetics of a tree. Actually, they're interested in traffic safety, traffic calming, and those are things that trees can do. What the project meant, though, is that actually instead of bollards, Bristol is now starting to use trees. And one of the reasons for that is that during the project, we could show that actually there was great concern that actually where we were putting trees in the centre of the reservation, or where we were putting trees on on build outs that they were going to get knocked over, and that didn't happen. We knew it wouldn't happen, but we had to complete the project to prove it didn't. And actually, one of the big issues that engineers have is that if in the picture on the left they'd usually put a bollard there. Well, bollards are designed to break if someone drives into them. So what happens is cars drive over them because they know it's not going to damage the car. Trees, once they get big enough, don't tend to just fall over. So actually, cars don't drive over them. So actually, from an engineering perspective, by putting trees in instead of bollards, it was acting as a saving measure. On the right-hand side, again, are some more elms, and again, these have been used to narrow the road so that it's traffic calming. They're going to provide amazing amount of shade, and they're going to make the area, which is part of a new cycle route, a much nicer place to live. So the whole project kind of changed the way I work with other professionals, and it makes a lot of difference to the work we do now. In that, we're now trying to talk in ways that other people understand. And the reason for that is because actually, my planting budget for our highways department when I was at Bristol was about £30,000 a year. The bus route was a 2-year project, and we were given £500,000 to put trees in. That's a lot of money. That's almost 15 years worth of planting. Without it, we wouldn't have been able to get trees in across a large swathe of Bristol. So we need to look for where all this money is, and we need to tap into that. However, I've moved on from Bristol, others have moved on from Bristol, and sometimes, things can be lost. And this is unfortunately a bad example, I guess, of a new cycle scheme that's gone in. And the cycle scheme, unfortunately, because of a lack of engagement with the new tree team, has basically gone in on the wrong side. Okay, so what you've now got is vehicles being pushed close to existing trees, and trees being damaged, and that's not good. Whereas if the cycle route had been put on the other side, then the cycle route would have basically defended those trees. It would have been a nice place for cyclists to go. So again, it's important that cross-departmental working is not lost. So thank you this morning for taking time to listen to me. I can now take some questions, and if you have any questions that you come up with later, please take down my email address, and please send me an email. Thank you very much for your time. White Ladies Road. The White Ladies Road, for those of you that know Bristol, it runs from the Clifton Downs all the way down into the centre. It was a very wide road at the time, about 4 or 5 lanes across. There were lots of accidents happening. There were lots of issues at night of people being knocked over as they staggered across the road. It was kind of a nightclubby, kebab shops, and that was kind of what it was about. So because of the work we'd done, we said, well, actually, we really want to put bigger tree pits in. We know there's space for them. There was a lot of pushback from the cycle lobby at the time because they wanted cycle lanes up and down it on either side. We were concerned that wouldn't work and that wouldn't slow traffic. And so we showed what had happened up in London at Kensington High Street, where tree pits had been put in to slow traffic down. And the engineers really liked that idea. So what we got was much bigger tree pits, which meant, is much better for the trees.